Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry to interrupt this dinner party or cocktail party you're having. But welcome instead to the meeting of Eastern Planning tonight. My name is Penny Rivers and I chair this committee. Please keep your statements brief and to the point. We have 5 speakers this evening. In order to vote on an application, you must be in the room for the whole debate, and if needed, we will take a comfort break. So we come to agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. Kissy, are there any apologies, please?
Hi, we've had apologies from Council Maxine Gale.
Thank you. And members, are you content to agree the minutes of the last meeting?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Kissy, are there any?
I have not received it. Oh, I haven't received any, but Councillor Follows has something that he would like to say.
Councillor Follows.
Kind of declaration of interest on item 8.3, as I'm a member of Godalming Town Council who's rendered an opinion on this, but I still intend to stay and vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So agenda item number 4, questions by members of the public. Kissy, are there any?
There are none.
And are there any questions by members?
There are none.
Thank you. So we have agenda item number 6, which is any relevant updates. Bethany, can you update us on the latest guidance, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just to really draw members' attention to an email that was circulated from Andrew Longley, the Planning Policy Manager, this afternoon, which sets out the timetable going forward for part 2 of the plan, with the schedule of main modifications. Also, there was an update regarding the 5-year housing and land supply position statement. As of, I believe it was a couple of days ago now, we have published a statement stating that we have 4.9 years housing land supply. So the tilted balance is still engaged and doesn't affect any of the items in front of you this evening. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And now we come to our planning applications and to the one subject to public speaking. So the first one tonight is at Lee Farm, Northcote Lane, Shamley Green. Philippa, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. The application site is located to the south of Northcote Lane and Shamley Green. It comprises a large agricultural holding and associated dwelling. It features a 4-stable stable block, a barn and a sand school. The dwelling at Lee House is accessed via an existing access via Northcote Lane, which passes around the boundaries of a barn conversion and old house to the north of Lee Farm. There is another access further to the east of Lee House, also from Northcote Lane. A public right-of-way footpath 312 runs through the application site from north to south. So it runs down the driveway here and then down a track beside the driveway to the house. The character of the area is rural with a number of residential properties adjacent to the site. So turning to the site photos, photos A and B show the existing access B from Northcote Lane, showing it there. Photograph C is looking west from access B along Northcote Lane and D is looking east. Photographs E and F are looking south from access B up the field, so along this line here. Photograph G is looking north down towards that access and H is looking northeast. Photograph I is looking east across the grazing land in this direction and J is looking in that direction. Photograph K is looking west along the access track which goes towards the stables down here. And L is looking east away from the stables back along this track. M is looking at the existing barn and N is looking at the existing driveway, which you would go down that direction to get to the dwelling. Photographs O and P are looking northwest towards the existing barn where the proposed parking would be. The parking would be adjacent to this barn here. Photograph Q is looking north adjacent to the driveway to the dwelling and showing the public footpath, which is in here. And R is looking sort of down the footpath and the dwelling is further down here. S is looking west across the grazing land and T is looking towards the stables and sand school. So turning to the proposed access plan, this shows existing access A here and B here, so both existing accesses. Here is some like hard standing and an alternative parking spot which could be provided on mats on the grass, and the proposed parking for the proposal is here adjacent to the stables. So I've shown that in more detail here. There's space for 7 vehicles adjacent to the existing barn and driveway. There's no works required to provide these spaces. Sufficient space exists for vehicles to pass to ensure that the public right of way and driveway is not obstructed. So turning to the main matters for consideration, the application site comprises an agricultural holding. The application seeks permission for grass livery grazing on the whole site. Up to a maximum of 6 grass livery horses would be kept on the land alongside the applicant's own horses and sheep. The grazing of animals, including horses, is within the scope of agriculture. Including the whole site within the application red line enables the grazing of animals to be rotated between different fields, therefore enabling individual fields to be rested or used specifically for other agricultural activities when needed. Permission was granted in 2017 for the erection of a stable, sand school and hard standing, which are restricted for private use in association with the dwelling at Lee Farm. The limited use of these facilities for the readying of the grass livery horses for exercise and the use of the sand school is considered acceptable given the domestic size of the stables, hard standing and sand school, which are self-limiting in that regard. With regards to the impact on the greenbelt, the grazing of horses is consistent with the existing agricultural use of the land. The proposed limited use of the existing domestic equestrian facilities of the owners by the owners of the commercial grass livery horses is consistent with the permitted use for outdoor sport and recreation in the greenbelt. No new buildings or structures are proposed as part of this application. The fields would have the same appearance as they do now. The proposal would therefore not materially detract from the openness or the purposes of the greenbelt. In terms of the visual amenity, AONB and AGLV, as noted, no new buildings or structures are proposed. Whilst the AONB advisor's comments are noted, officers consider that the grazing of horses is consistent with the agricultural use of the land and is entirely expected in the AONB and rural context. As noted, any use of the existing domestic facilities would be self-limiting due to the modest size and scale of the facilities. With regard to residential amenity, the concerns raised regarding the potential for the intensification of the use are noted, particularly in relation to noise and disturbance. Whilst officers acknowledge that the site has not been intensively farmed for recent years, it is a material consideration that the use of the existing agricultural holding could be intensified at any point without the requirement for further permission. This could significantly increase vehicle movements. The proposal would utilise existing access point B. This would direct low-level traffic away from the closest residential properties. In addition, 6 horses kept under grass livery is unlikely to generate a significant number of vehicle movements. The hours would be limited by condition. Any intensification would require further assessment and further consideration. With regard to highways, countryside access and parking, both access A and B are existing. It's a material consideration that the use of either access could be intensified at any points without the requirement for further permission. The application proposes the use of access B for the grass livery use. The County Highway Authority notes that the visibility displays fall slightly below of what would normally be expected on a road such as Northcote Lane. However, the proposal would provide a betterment for drivers egressing the site compared to the existing arrangement. As noted previously, sufficient parking is provided but adjacent to the existing barn. Sufficient space exists to avoid obstructing or interfering with the public right of way. In terms of retained policy RD14, which relates to commercial equestrian, as set out in detail in my officer report, the proposal would be in accordance with retained policy RD14 of the local plan 2002. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Philippa. Now we have two speakers. We have Georgina Bazin speaking first via Zoom.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me?
We can see and hear you.
Awesome. Good evening. There are a couple of things that I'd pick up on from the officer. The access point B, which she says is existing, there has been a gate into an agricultural field. Yes, no driveway existed, no access existed until it was formed a year ago with the fencing. That is not an established use. Part ID 13 of the local plan says no commercial development associated with horse keeping will be supported. So I don't understand why all of a sudden this is okay. Greenbelt planning, the whole premise of Greenbelt is set to prevent any change of use of land unless there are exceptional circumstances to this. I don't know where the exceptional circumstances are. So it's against the guidance of the NPFF, the Interest of Residential Amenities and the AONB. The horse numbers, I believe this is a spurious application as stated by Clive Smith, to state a number of horses, as in 6 to be liveried. As far as I'm aware, horses do not have number plates for being recognised to which horse it is. So how would this be manned by the council? Again, it appears that that would then fall out of anybody else's domain of keeping an eye on actually what was happening. The activity requested is basically from sunrise to sundown, 7 days a week. We are here with this application because of a complaint to the enforcement officer, because the neighbours have been so disturbed by the existing activity that has occurred for the last 3 years. They've had a loss of quiet, they have a loss of privacy, and they have had severe disturbance. In the planning application, I understand it is the onus of the applicant to provide proof of what they need a new entrance for. With regards to access point B, the only point that they make is that it was helpful for feeding horses. Well, again, as far as I'm aware, for the last 3 years, up to 30 horses haven't starved. So I don't know why this access is required now, when the other access cannot be got rid of because there are 3 other houses that use this and have a right of way over it. I note the observations for John Baker, the countryside access officer, who states he has no objection on the surface of it to these 6 proposed parking spaces. With the access coming off point B, he hasn't even looked at. Because if you'd like to look at the map, as the access comes down, up through the field and down to the barn, there is actually 12-foot laurel hedging there, which goes in a cross, a 90-degree crossroads, with the path, you've gone past it, with the path of the footpath. So the access down towards the barn, where the path comes, the footpath 312 comes up to walk across, that access down for cars is a totally blind access, both to walkers and to traffic coming down. They wouldn't see each other until they met each other. The parking at the barn is actually on the boundary to Old House. It shows a fence, which is literally within a metre of where these cars would park. And that is actually under 100 foot away from actually their property. So any noise and disturbance from the portaloo, the stable girl, the cars going in and out, the vehicle that they use for management is literally in the garden of Old House. The parking spaces proposed at access B on mats, which there is no hard standing there at all, is actually 75 foot away from our bedrooms.
Could you come to an end now, please?
Yes. So it's clearly stated that no disturbance to natives should be permitted. The reason we are here is because of that disturbance. Our homes are a place of sanctuary, not to be surrounded by commercial activity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And now we have Alec Haley speaking to support. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Haley.
Good evening. I'm Alec Haley, one of the applicants from Lee Farm. I think I would really like to talk about facts and why this application complies with policy considerations, which have been set out very clearly by the Independent Planning Officer in her professional report. The first key fact to emphasise is that the land in question is already classified as agricultural land. Lee Farm has in its history operated as a pig farm, a market garden, a commercial nursery, and for sheep grazing and hay growing. It is DEFRA registered. Because the land is already agricultural, any activity resulting from a change in use should be compared to its alternative use for agriculture and not to a baseline of zero activity. Agricultural use, depending on its intensity, would itself involve the travel of staff, the use of machinery, and the movement and parking of large vehicles. It would run to an agricultural timetable. This could well have greater effect than 6 horse owners who do not attend daily. As to access, Lee Farm has long established access for domestic and agricultural traffic to Northcote Lane via both access points A and B in the location plan. Access point B dates from the 1980s and is marked on title deeds and the highways plan. As those members of the committee who have visited will be aware, access point B has much better visibility than access point A. The use of access point B for this proposal has been approved by Surrey Highways, who, as Philippa mentioned, noted the improved visibility. The second key fact is the AONB. The AONB officer's report, summarised on page 16, does contain one material error. This has already been advised to the Council and the Parish Council that requires correction. The complete landscaping mentioned there was in fact submitted and approved by Waverley Borough Council on 22nd December 2020. Additionally, as concluded by the planning officer, page 22 of the documents, the volume of past applications and the possibility of future applications are not relevant to the merits of this particular application. Crucially for the AONB, there would be no differentiation in the appearance of horses in the AONB, whatever their ownership. Many people would consider, and the plan officer's report concurs, that the grazing of horses is entirely consistent with an AONB, particularly in an area where there are numerous bridle paths and very limited agricultural infrastructure. Thirdly, I would like to address the point raised by the Parish Council about the use of the whole acreage. 6 grazing livery horses will not require 40 acres of land at any one time. However, good environmental practice and animal welfare necessitate a seasonal rotation of fields. For example, some fields do not have adequate shade in the summer, and all fields need to be periodically rested. Given this, it's not practical to define exactly what acreage will be used when for the 6 horses, but it will only be a minority of the whole area at any one time. Finally, as summarised on pages 17 and 18, letters of support from 17 addresses have been received, including 3 immediate neighbours, and objections from only 2 addresses. This indicates majority local support. I would therefore respectfully ask the Planning Committee to grant this application and support a small local business which employs local staff and suppliers and provides a rural leisure activity to local people. Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Haley. So members, I have Paul Follows first. It's over to you. So Paul Follows.
Can I
please.
defer to the ward member first? I believe he probably wants the right to go first.
Michael.
I should make it clear I'm not the ward member, but
My apologies, I'm thinking the new boundaries, aren't I? Sorry.
Northbrook Lane to the north is my patch, Northbrook Lane to the south is not. But if it's not, we're just into Shamley Green. But if I speak, I thank those members that came on a site visit, which I asked for. And I think the site visit was useful. If I could deal with the access points first. I think we all discovered that getting out of access A was an interesting experience, especially with those of us with rather long cars, in that it was very difficult to get out in one swoop to the left when we left. The access B, one can see, has been there for some time, or rather the gate and the sideline, the vistas have been there for some time. But I don't think there was very much evidence on site that it was actually being used as an access way at the moment. I think that what worries me, and the site visit clarified this, is that when you come in at access B, and if you want to then go and park your car at A, towards A at the barns, going round the house at Lee House, you're going to have an uphill bit to start with. And with the rain we've had, I suggest that that would be an interesting experience for people driving cars, let alone potentially with a horse box or anything of that nature. And I think we need to make it abundantly clear that this planning application does not include any resurfacing or improving the access way by doing any engineering to it. It is just earth at the moment, and potentially mud, I suppose. And this is made clear in the officer's report. And I would suggest that we have some sort of informative to make that abundantly clear. I do accept that from a planning point of view, we have use as agricultural at the moment, which if the owner of the farm wished to carry on normal agricultural activities, it could be worse than what is currently being applied for. But I really want to check on some of the facts. This is for 6 commercial grass livery. I understand the owner has her own horses, 6, I believe, but I think the planning officer may have the information. And there's another group of horses, I understand, on the site that are there to see out their days, in inverted commas, that won't be hacking or doing anything, but they are still there. And I don't know whether those are owned by the applicant or are commercially being looked after, because that could be an interesting situation if we've already got more than 6 who are there seeing out their days at a fee. Is this on top of 6 more commercial? I think we need to know what the starting point is of the number of horses that are on site. There were certainly more than 6 when we went round, from what I could see when we went round last week. The other thing I want to make clear is that horses, it says on the middle of page 13, horses be used for recreational hacking only. Now, I think that could be slightly misleading, because I suspect that the horse owners will not only want to hack, but they might wish to take their horses away for competitions with horse boxes, loading them up in the horse box, taking them away, which will produce traffic movements of more than the cars. But I think that is something which we ought to be aware of, and I did raise it with the planning officer, who indicated that probably we couldn't do anything to stop that sort of activity. But I think we need to do it with our eyes open, that recreational hacking could be more, it could be more than recreational hacking. The other thing is that I've certainly been contacted by Clive Smith of the Surrey County Council concerning Surrey Hills AONB management plan. And he makes it clear that he was objecting not only on historic things, but also on the basis that the application would conflict with the management plan with reference to resisting developments, resulting in the loss of farmland, which contributes to the character of the AONB. I think our officers covered that and indicates that in her view, what is currently being proposed would not change the character of the land, whether it be sheep or whether it be cows, and so on. So I think I would like to know how many horses there are around, and whether we could put on an informative. It is, of course, we have got a condition relating to 6 horses commercial only, but we do need to make quite sure that if the owners of the commercial horses can't proceed beyond the gate at B, what happens? They say a mat on the grass. I understand there's been some hardcore put down in that area before in the past, according to the neighbours. And you know what's going to happen. What worries me is what's going to happen when the vehicles can't get up the hill from B, and then we'll no doubt have another planning application, or maybe the applicants will do what they want to do first and then apply for planning second. But I just want to make it abundantly clear that I'm sure the neighbours will be on the lookout for any changes in the surface of that accessway. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. I have 3 other speakers, Councillor Follows, Councillor Townsend, Councillor Wilson. So Councillor Follows, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I almost feel like I should declare an interest that I lived in Devon for many, many years and saw lots of horses in the rural area and didn't bat an eyelid on them at all. Can I just ask one thing just for immediate clarification before I continue, which is that the owner, if they were just stabling their own, if they were just having their own horses on here and not for any commercial purposes whatsoever, could have as many horses as they want without limit, rather than the physical limits of a field to support them. Is that correct, Philippa? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just so everyone can hear. Oh, yes, that's correct.
Right, so the only reason we're really considering this is because there's a commercial request for 6 livery horses, which, as far as I can see, is controlled by condition 3, and any overnight noise is controlled by condition 4, preventing them to be used in that way. So just in terms of the green belt, I mean, when we're looking at applications like this in protected space, we're talking about some genuine change of use that makes it a material development in some way. And this is effectively 6 horses and some other changes of impact which are fairly minor. And I think as I think it was the supporter said, and I don't disagree, we shouldn't be comparing this to green space land. We should be comparing it to the agricultural use which the owner could legitimately use it for. They could be doing all sorts of other agricultural use significantly above what 6 horses would generate. And so I don't believe personally there is any particular material objection that we can offer about 6 horses. I also don't think it is in any way a detriment to the rural character of the area. In fact, it's probably quite complementary in a few ways. And certainly it wouldn't fuss me too much to see as many as, I think Michael Goodridge was suggesting, 12 other horses of miscellaneous ownership that might be trotting around some of the neighbouring fields. It wouldn't particularly bother me either. So I do support any informatives that do any controls to the access. There were some inferences about enforcement breaches in the past, which I'm sure planning enforcement will pick up, but conditions 3 and 4 deal with most of the issues, and the following conditions deal with a lot of the access. So if there are any informatives on access, obviously I'd be interested to see what people are proposing, but I honestly can't imagine any particular objection I could find to this. Considering the owner, if they weren't charging anything to do with these horses, could put as many horses as they could physically fit in here, and we wouldn't have anything we could say about it. And at the end of the day, we'd still be in the countryside. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Philippa, did you want to add anything to any of those 2 speakers? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It might just be worth me clarifying the number of horses. So the applicant has 6 private horses, 13 retired racehorses or old ponies, and a miniature Shetland pony. And just for a bit of context in terms of the recommended size of holding for number of horses. So looking at DEFRA's Code of Practice for the Welfare of Horses, Ponies, Donkeys and their Hybrids 2017, it sets out that as a general rule, each horse requires approximately 0.5 to 1 hectare of grazing of a suitable quality if they're not going to be fed anything supplementary. So Lee Farm has 15 hectares, which going by that guidance could accommodate 15 to 30 horses without supplementary feed. And in terms of an informative, we could absolutely attach an informative reminding the applicant that this doesn't grant any sort of upgrading of access tracks, etc. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. That Shetland pony definitely didn't swing it for me, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippa and Paul. So Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of queries. One is about the condition 3 on the previous planning application, WA 2017-056A, which seemed to state that the use of the keeping of commercial horse keeping was not allowed. And whilst I see that officers have stated that it's not strictly in accordance, to me, or strictly in compliance, which is on page 22 of the report, I would see that as being completely against condition 3 of the previous planning permission. So I would like some further explanation of that. And also a little bit of concern about the road and access B. And whilst, you know, highways have said about the actual physical access, there isn't any road there. And it did say within the report that the road would need planning permission if there was to be a physical road. And I'm just wondering how an access can be given for something that hasn't actually been approved. Whilst I can appreciate that farmers can go in and out of fields wherever they want to with tractors and goodness knows what, this is actually stating that this can be used for a commercial purpose. And I just need to understand really how that can be the case when there isn't a physical road there. And if there was a physical road, that would be obviously development in the AONB, in the Greenbelt. And I just, you know, we might be looking at that slightly differently for that. So I need to understand those 2 points. The other thing is on condition 4 about the horses not being kept overnight in stables and needing permission of the planning authority. I think there's an area in the report which states that they won't be kept overnight unless it's for safety or security or something, health and safety or something, or security. So I wonder how enforceable that would be, because obviously if they needed to keep a horse in overnight, are they really going to have to get written permission from the planning authority to keep one in? So whether that condition is actually enforceable, or whether we need to add the wording unless in the cases of health and safety of the animal or something onto condition 4. And then coming on to condition 7, which states about the visibility displays, I'm just again confused about whether or not we can actually give visibility displays to a track coming out of a green field. Just need a bit more clarification on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Philippa, do you want to fill in any of those spaces?
Thank you, Chair. So as you say, Councillor Townsend, there was a previous condition, I don't have the wording in front of me, but requiring sort of restricting the use of the stables and sand school and hard standing to private use relating to the dwelling at Lee Farm. Oh, Kim's found it.
Helpful for me to give you the wording.
Kim's found it. For me.
Oh, thank you.
So I'll read it out so that everyone is on the same page. So it says, the sand school and equestrian use hereby permitted shall only be used for private equestrian purposes, ancillary to the use of the existing dwelling, Lee Farm, and the address as a private residence. It shall not be used for any commercial equestrian purpose. So I guess that's why this application is here. If the applicant was to be grazing horses that don't belong to them, that they could just be grazing there. But the whole point of this application is that they do wish to allow 6 horses that they don't own to graze on the land. They aren't going to be stabled overnight, and I'll come on to your point about health and safety in a moment, but they're not going to be grazed overnight. The intention is that the owner may bring the horse in from the field brush it, tack it up, take it for a ride, and then would return the horse to the field. They're not going to be using the stables and the sand school in the way that the owner of the site does. So there is a distinction, but I guess that condition is what prompted us to be here tonight discussing it. I thought you were going to say something, sorry, Beth. In terms of the health and safety point, we don't feel it would be enforceable to say in the event of an emergency or a health and safety incident, they would have to contact us to get permission. But the stables themselves are very self-limiting in their size, so only 4 horses could be in at any one time, and they may be the commercial horses, or they may be the private horses, or the retired horses, but it's very self-limiting in the size, and we don't think that the distinction would really cause any harm if they did have to be stabled for a short period of time. But yeah, we don't think that adding a restriction in terms of health and safety or emergencies would really sort of be enforceable. Visibility displays, there's quite a big distance between the highway and the gates. The gate's obviously open there, but you can see here that distance is quite big, and the members that were on the site visit will have seen that there's quite a sort of generous space between the highway and the gate, and the visibility displays suggested by the highway authority are just to ensure that vehicles can turn out more safely than they could at the moment if we weren't discussing this application. So it's actually betterment that we have that condition now, because we wouldn't have it otherwise. Hopefully that makes sense. Does that answer all your queries?
Slightly. I mean, I'm still a bit confused about the condition 4, but if you think it's adequate, then fine. The point about the road is we're giving permission for people to travel across the field if we grant this application, we're saying that they can travel, vehicles can travel across the field. And I'm just, I haven't come across an application anywhere else where we have given permission for. Are we implying that we're giving permission for that road? That is the concern I'm having here, is that in us giving an agreement, say tonight, that we agree that this can go ahead, I'm just a little bit concerned that we're actually agreeing that that road exists, and where by virtue of an agreement for commercial people to travel in and out, that we're saying actually, yes, we're agreeing this planning permission for this road by implied consent, if you know what I mean. And perhaps Barry could help with that one.
I do understand your point. I guess people could drive up and down it now, but as sort of Councillor Goodridge said, any upgrading of that track would require permission, and they would need to seek that from us. So I don't think there's anything stopping anyone driving up and other than the landowner's permission. There's nothing stopping anyone driving up there now, because it is an access that joins an access up a track up here. So I don't know if you guys want to add anything, but.
It's the commercial element. It's not to do with the residential. People can probably drive all over their fields and get their friends and family to do it. It is the commercial element that I'm particularly interested in. Thank you.
I'm just wondering whether planning colleagues think that we are in the area of inappropriate development in the green belt. If there was a significant level, we're not. Well, we have to treat the application on its merits tonight, Councillor Sunset. What is before us, I don't think we can project forward into the future. What is what?
I just wonder, would we, if there are farm gates all over the countryside, and are we saying that anyone, that vehicles can travel, any vehicles can then travel up and down them, where that this is a track. I appreciate that it's there at the moment, and it could be used by the owners and their friends, family, whatever. I totally appreciate that. It's that we are currently saying within this application that we are allowing commercial use of that, which is the thing I can't quite get my head around at the moment. Sorry.
this was common land, Councillor Townsend, it would be a criminal offence to try on the green surface of common land. But I think if you wish to.
Yeah, if I understand your query correctly. So the driving over of a field by anyone, commercial or not, regardless of the lawful use of land, is not a use in planning terms. It is a means of access. So I can't see a conflict here in terms of commercial versus private use. So I don't think, I mean, I'm pretty certain we're not granting any form of consent. I mean, as Philly have said, we can add an informative to say that the permission does not, any planning permission that's granted tonight does not purport to grant any form of consent for engineering operations, for operational development, anything relating to that particular stretch of land in relation to commercial activity. I think that's as far as we can take it.
Thank you, Bethany. We have some other speakers. We have Councillor Wilson, Councillor Cossa, Councillor Reid, and then Councillor Dina. So Councillor Wilson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I too am very stuck. I think it was a crucial part of the initial allowance of the previous application that it should not have commercial use. I don't think it would have been granted without that condition. Therefore, I can't support that we would say that it can now be used for commercial use. If, looking at Councillor Townsend's concern about the track, if we say that it can be used for commercial use, then we are adding to the traffic on that track. And I couldn't support that. I'm also very concerned about the AONB advisors' comments here as well. So personally, I will not be supporting this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Cossa, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. One or 2 points. First of all, can I say I'm really sorry I couldn't get to the site visit. I always like to attend when I can, but it was pretty short notice and I had something else to do. But I did try to listen very carefully to what my colleague Councillor Goodridge said about that, but I have to say it hasn't overridden my general view about this application. Perhaps like Councillor Follows, I ought to declare some sort of interest because I do have, I stress, a very small share in a number of racehorses, and so I'm more used to seeing them at Ascot and at other similar places. But quite interestingly, that there is a good tradition in the area which suggests that when their days are done as racehorses, money is made available from their owners to make sure they've got somewhere to see out their days. And I'm very much, I think, with Councillor Follows on this. Really, I actually like seeing horses in the countryside. I do consider it part of the rural landscape, and I haven't heard anything that sways me from the planning reasons given by our officers in their report. I haven't yet heard a proper planning reason for objecting to this proposal. And as for the traffic coming up and down, I think this is a pretty limited proposal, and that access is being used at the moment. The permission is for a limited extension, and I just don't see a problem with it, frankly, Chairman. So that I'll leave it at that.
Thank you indeed. Councillor Reid and then Councillor Dinas. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, we are looking, I'm reminding everyone again, at this application. If you look on page 11 at the agenda item 8.1, it says, and I'd like to remind everyone, change of use of agricultural land to mixed grazing. Now that is something that we need to really think about. I must declare that I am the Waverley representative on the AONB. I'm on that board and I support what Clive Smith has written. And in particular, we have agreed as a council to the AONB management plan. And in that, Clive has quoted on page 1, one of his, in his submission, which is page 1, he has quoted, farmland in the Surrey Hills has diminished, often going to equestrian uses, yet it is important to conserve landscape character. Consequently, development resulting in the loss of agricultural land will be resisted. Now, we've agreed to that as Waverley Borough Council planners and members. And so that's why I quoted on page 11 of the application, which is the first page, change of use of agricultural land to mixed grazing. He also goes on to say, as the management plan has been formally adopted by the borough and other Surrey Hills constituent planning authorities, mixed grazing is too loose a term as to the proportion of land that would be grazed by horses and the proportion for farm animals. Again, a condition seeking to control this would be unenforceable. I wanted to quote that because, you know, it is my duty to do so. On the next page of Clive's report from the AONB, he says, further up Northcote Lane with a formalised junction, and so it progressively undermines the formal character of this part of the AONB. And I think that entrance is going to be upgraded. That could be a logical consequence of permitting this application, which the planning authority may wish to foresee. And he suggests that the AONB reason for refusal would be justified, including reference to the existing Waverley and emerging local plans and the intentions of the Surrey Hills AONB management plan. And he goes on to say, and this is, I'm quoting now because of Councillor Townsend's comments, the council's planning enforcement team, whether the track that has formed needs retrospective planning permission. So that is another thing we need to consider, that then they would apply if they get all that changed as an access for retrospective permission. The horse, so those are my points really. I'm supporting what Clive Smith has actually said. And we have to consider this application. I just wanted to go into that. Now, the other point I wanted to make was the rights of way, because of course, these fields are very near the rights of way, and the parking problem might be a consideration for, you know, refusal because they're very, very near. And it's very sad to say that all of this may come under planning enforcement in the future. So those are my concerns. I think I've done my bit on the AONB. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. Philippa, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points to say that grazing falls under the definition of agriculture. So they could graze any animal currently under the current use of the land. And the second one is to say that the park, with regards to the parking, the current right of way, it's a bit small, I'm afraid, but the footpath comes down here. So it comes down the existing driveway and then is on a footpath beside the driveway. So there are already cars using, it's a shared use already for the driveway to the house and the right of way. And there is sufficient space to ensure that the parking is not obstructing the right of way, and sufficient space for those vehicles to manoeuvre safely, such as not to obstruct the right of way. And it would be an offence if they, in any event without this application, for the applicant to obstruct the right of way. So we are satisfied that there is no conflict there because sufficient space does exist for the parking and the right of way. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you indeed. Councillor Denis.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of the points have been made. Somebody still got their mic on. Okay, let's try again. A lot of the points I wanted to make have been made, so I'm not going to repeat them or give any declaration of interest for knowledge of horses or anything else, although I did watch Black Beauty once. One of the main slides that came up earlier on was main matters for consideration, and it said the compliance with retained policy RD14. Looking at page 20 of the papers, page 20, it talks about policy RD14, and I suppose subsections A and E are probably applicable for this application. Then turning back to page 16, which was the Surrey Hills AONB advisor, which has been raised by Councillor Reid. I think the second from bottom point, it says, I mean, the first point says objection. The loss of farmland to equestrian uses is undermining the natural beauty of the AONB. So this is the expert advice that we've asked for, and that is what they have said. I am concerned, I think it was Councillor Wilson who talked about the vehicles. If you've got vehicles driving up and down, that's going to impact on the AONB. And I can't dress it up in any other way. That gives me huge concern. I will wait for what any of my other colleagues say, but I'm minded not to support, but pending what other people say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have, I hope, as our last speaker on this item, which is just, we have spent 7 minutes less than the entire last planning committee on just one item. So Councillor Goodridge, last speaker, please.
Yeah, can I just, I'm not wanting to repeat anything I've said, but we've now been informed that there are 6 private horses, 13 retired horses and 1 Shetland pony. Are we aware that whether or not the owners of Lee Farm own all 20 of those animals? Because if some of the retired horses are being retired on behalf of the owners of those horses, that presumably they're being paid for that, and it's commercial use of grazing already. So does that give us a problem?
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. I am under the impression that the applicant owns the retired polo ponies and racehorses, but I don't know for certain. But that's the impression that I have. Rather than them being visited by anyone, I think that they have allowed these horses at the end of their days, without sounding too morbid, to sort of live out their last days on the land. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you just appreciate that if they're not, if there are 6, for example, owners of those retired horses that are in other ownership, then they've got their 6 already. And therefore they could not develop and have any more horses coming onto the land, and therefore there's potentially a problem. But I mean, I agree with Councillor Follows and Councillor Cossa. In my book, you know, horses rather than cows and sheep is not a problem. Perhaps I should declare an interest that on my property I've got 2 horses. But there we are. So, but it's just to make quite sure that I would like the informative added, and for the committee to agree an informative about the access way, to make it abundantly clear that no work should be done on this access way at all. So no materials put on it or anything else, because that would then be making it a different access way than it's there at the moment, which when we on the site visit, it was clearly grass and earth.
Thank you. Philippa.
Thank you. Just to come back on the number of horses, the applicant did apply for this 6, so I would have assumed that had they needed to seek permission for more horses not owned by them, they would have included that within the submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippa. I think our final speaker on this agenda item is the Vice Chair.
No, it's just to say that the construction of any roadway is covered by informative 2.
That informative appeared to cover highway land with a reference to highways, which is to do with the mouth of B.
Okay.
When I read it, it looked like it was highway land that we're talking about, not the land in the ownership of the applicant.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So does the committee agree the additional informative? Agreed. So with that additional informative agreed, we have a recommendation that this application be granted with conditions 1 to 8 and informatives now 1 to 3. Would all those in favour of granting the application please show? And those against? And any abstentions?
That motion is granted and it's carried.
Thank you, Philippa. We come to the second application in front of us tonight, land centred at those coordinates in the green Elstead, and I hand over to Tracy. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the erection of a new dwelling following the demolition of an existing stable building, including associated works. The application has been called in by Councillor David Else on the basis that 5 or more letter of representation has been received. The site is located within the Greenbelt outside of the settlement boundary, within the Surrey Hills AONB and an AJLB, and adjacent to a conservation area. The character of the site is very much rural in nature. It's sited north of fairly new dwellings of Anderson Place, dissected from those dwellings by a track that runs past and behind those dwellings. These photos show the context of the site and existing buildings. This top photo is showing the rear of the building from the east, seeing those new dwellings of Anderson Place in the background. And this bottom photo is showing the view. It's a fairly short view from the south. The application building or the existing building to be demolished is actually obscured by that, that vehicle there. Existing elevations are fairly self-explanatory. The block plan shows the placement of the existing stable building and the placement of the proposed dwelling. To be located further towards the north of the site and would take a different form and would be orientated both on a north-south and an east-west axis, given the L-shaped form of the building. The proposed dwelling is single-storey. The floor plan shows 3 bedrooms, general living area, and 2 covered external areas, porches. The proposed elevation shows the building. It'd be timber clad with a slate roof. The main entrance would be on the southern elevation with glazing focused on the north and west elevations. This slide and the following seeks to aid members in assessing the scale of the existing and proposed buildings. The existing building measures approximately 17 metres along its longest elevation, and the proposed building would measure 21 metres. It's noted that the porch area is external space, but the solid roof form extends over this, and the perception of such would be that the building as a whole is considerably larger in length. The height of the increase is also noted as significant. This slide, whilst I've done my best to size the draw, oh, sorry, this side is not scaled. These are not scaled drawings. I've just done my best to be able to denote that the width of the 17 meters of this part of the building is approximately equal to the length of that building. This slide, however, is scaled. So the top image shows the northern elevation in black, and the left of the two pink images that you can see directly above that is the existing northern elevation. So you can see that there's a significant difference there. The lower image, if you can see from the slide, the black is the proposed dwelling, and the pink outline, which is denoted by this blue arrow here, this is the existing stable building. The main matters for consideration are the impact upon the Greenbelt and the AONB and AGLV. The merits of the application are that it's been submitted proposing that it's in accordance with paragraph 149 and 150 of the NPPF, where previously developed land you can develop upon so long as there is no greater impact upon the openness of the Greenbelt, and officers have come to a conclusion that the impact would be greater, and therefore the application has a recommendation for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tracy. So here we have two speakers on this. We have Janet Long speaking in favour. Janet, you have 4 minutes.
Good evening, members. I'm here to speak in support of the application for the new dwelling on the site of the existing equestrian facilities at the Paddock and Elstead. The application is promoted on the basis that planning permission for the conversion of the existing stables to a detached single dwelling has already been granted permission and therefore represents the fallback position when considering the application. However, rather than converting the existing building, it's considered preferable to remove all structures from the site and construct a high-quality new dwelling, albeit one which has the appearance of a timber-framed barn conversion. This means it will be wholly appropriate form of development for this site on the edge of the village. It is important to note that case law has established that equestrian facilities are a form of previously developed land where Greenbelt policy supports redevelopment for residential use. This is provided the new dwelling has no greater impact on the openness. This application has been carefully designed to ensure it is no greater in terms of floor space than the existing barns. It should be noted that permission has been given for a number of similar projects in Waverley for residential redevelopment, replacing existing facilities. In this respect, this proposal is not unique or groundbreaking, simply follows an established pattern of redevelopment. Overall, the new dwelling will offer a far more attractive form of development than the existing structures on site. The existing stables, sand school, storage sheds and general equestrian paraphernalia will all be removed, and the area re-landscaped to provide a small residential garden. And we are willing to accept a condition requiring submission of details of landscaping and garden area prior to occupation of the dwelling. Overall, the new dwelling will provide a far more attractive form of development. The new dwelling will be single story with all accommodation on a single level, which has been designed specifically for the needs of the applicant, one of whom has restricted mobility and requires all facilities on the ground floor. The size, scale and design will result in a net improvement to the appearance of the Greenbelt in this location. Rather than being an alien feature, it will be wholly appropriate for the situation. It is also material that the proposed change of use to residential will result in a reduction of vehicle movements from the site, including a reduction of the large horse vehicles. And although some horses will be kept in the northern paddocks, the degree of equestrian activity will be significantly reduced. This will result in a net improvement to the general amenity of those neighbours living adjacent, as they will see a reduction in vehicle movements. It is notable that the majority of neighbours have written in support of this application, and some 14 letters of support have been received, which does indeed indicate they would prefer to see a dwelling on this site rather than the somewhat shabby facilities which currently exist. In summary, we believe this is a suitable and appropriate development in the green belt, which will have no detrimental impact on the wider countryside setting and will result in a net improvement to the appearance of the land, wider biodiversity and ecological value of the site. We therefore urge you to grant permission for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have Councillor Jane Jacobs from Elstead Parish Council.
Thank you, Chair. I've already had my internet failing me once, so I hope it lasts this, but if it doesn't, I have sent in my submission. Anyway, good evening. The site of the proposed application lies within the AONB, the AGLV and the Greenbelt. The fact that it adjoins the Elstead Village settlement boundary is irrelevant. AONB, Greenbelt and AGLV land designations are there to protect specific areas of our countryside, and as such, regardless of the proximity to a settlement boundary, tinkering at the edges should be firmly discouraged, or else the process of having land designations is utterly pointless and makes a mockery of the planning process. Elstead Parish Council's overriding concern is that of precedent. There are many buildings of a similar ilk located in Elstead Parish which, should this application be approved, would be ripe for demolition and replacement with a residential dwelling. Looking at the wider picture, there are indeed several thousands of such structures throughout Waverley Borough Council's green belt that could follow a very similar process. And the question really here is, do you really want to be responsible for the tarmacking over of our precious rural landscape? The existing planning permission is for a reuse of a building within the green belt under policy RD7 of the local plan 2002. It is highly probable that permission for a demolition and a replacement building would not have been granted permission in the first instance, bearing in mind the AONB, AGLV and green belt designations. So to conclude, it's always good to be brief, I feel. Elstead Parish Council would ask that you refuse this application on grounds of A, the dangerous precedent, and B, the irrefutable harm to the green belt, AONB and AGLV. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you indeed. And our first speaker is the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify something, we do have a planning permission for this site for a dwelling. Is that correct?
Yes, we
Yes.
have a permission to convert the existing building to a residential dwelling.
To a dwelling. So we're talking about whether we allow permission for a dwelling or a dwelling at the moment. One of your slides, you showed the height of the existing building, which is to be converted to a dwelling, has permission to be converted to a dwelling, as I think 1.88 meters. You've got one there, yeah. Well, it says length, but it means height, I guess. Yeah, which is in old money 6'2". Now I have to sort of wonder how the heck we gave planning permission in the first place for a building that's only just over 6 foot high, and that 6 foot seems to include a pitched roof. How did we give planning permission for a building? How can that building possibly be converted to a dwelling? But we gave permission for it to be converted to a dwelling. So we have permission for a dwelling on the site, and somebody wants to build something much nicer looking. We got photographs of that building somewhere, I think, the existing building, and it's maybe agricultural, but it's ugly agriculture. It's not like a nice old oak barn or something that somebody wants to convert. It's a ramshackle shed, really, and I can perfectly understand why somebody wants to knock it down and build something a lot nicer, albeit in a slightly different position. But I wait to hear what my colleagues have to say.
Thank you. We have Councillor Townsend next.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm extremely concerned about setting the precedent. I mean, we've already had in the speaker already referring to the fact that other conversions have taken place, or other stables have been perhaps knocked down and rebuilt. I don't actually know. But the thing is that this is in the green belt. It is in AONB. AGLV, and therefore exceptional circumstances have to exist to create a new dwelling, I would think. This is actually, you know, if you look on the actual orientation of this building, it's going from a building that goes, you know, north to south, so to speak, and now it's going into a complete L shape. So it does completely change the actual openness of that site and goes behind what was block 4 there, house 4. And, you know, whilst it's been referred to as a ramshackle shed, are we saying then that any ramshackle shed that comes forward can be then potentially knocked down and a much bigger dwelling put in its place, a much taller dwelling? And whilst, you know, we might say, oh, well, you know, the actual dwelling might look nicer. That is not the point. It's retaining the openness of the green belt that is the policy. And it's not whether or not we think, oh, well, that stable doesn't look as nice as this house. Consent has already been given for this to be converted, and that planning application can be implemented. This is because whoever wants to live on this wants this house instead, you know, and that isn't really in the spirit of the policy. And whilst we may not agree at times with that policy, you know, you can say, oh, well, this would look much nicer. The point is that that would set a precedent, and we would have lots of different people then coming forward and saying they want to knock down a small stable block and put in a bungalow, a large eaved bungalow. So, you know, I'm not looking at the design of this. I'm looking at it in terms of the green belt, the openness of the green belt. And to be honest, I have to support the planner's recommendation, the officer's recommendation to refuse this application. And, you know, and I wish the people all, you know, very well in implementing the application that the planning application they've already got on this site. And also, there's nothing in the application that I can see about the sewerage infrastructure, but I'm assuming that there is sewerage infrastructure and that available on this site, and that was covered in the original planning application, but something to consider as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. We then have Councillor Dinas and Councillor Follows and Councillor Cosse.
I actually didn't put my hand up, but as you called me, you obviously want to hear from me, but I was like, did I? I obviously moved my head or something, but so all I would say is I hear what Councillor Elsa said, but actually I agree with Councillor Townsend. I've obviously got a really dodgy mic here. We have policies for green belt, ANOB, etc. for a reason. And if we're not going to actually comply with what those policies are, then why do we have them? So all I'd say is I do support the officer on this one, and I won't move my head at all.
Thank you. Councillor Follows, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Townsend put it all pretty much straightforward as far as I'm concerned. I won't repeat all of it. I will agree with the officer's recommendation to refuse.
Thank you, Councillor Cosse.
Yes, I found quite interesting that reading the detail of what the AONB advisor put in on this, actually. I mean, if I've got this right, permission has been granted effectively for a conversion, but we have refused a proposal for demolishing the existing and putting a house up there, and that has gone to appeal. I wanted to ask a procedural question, actually, and there is a reason for it. Are we able, I think the answer is going to be no, but I want to ask the question anyway, are we able to defer our decision on this until that appeal has been determined? Because I think that would actually be quite instructive. I mean, if the appeal is refused, then I think that gives us a certain amount of information that might help us determine this. And similarly, if it were granted, the AONB advisor's view, and it may or may not be ours, I don't want to prejudice that, was that the proposal we have in front of us is a marginal improvement on the one that's currently gone to appeal. So that may also have determined a view. I mean, if it had been determined already, then that clearly would be something we would take in account of. So I simply have that question. Having said all of that, I do tend to take the view that most of my colleagues have expressed. I do have a concern that there are quite a lot of semi-derelict buildings across the countryside. And if we just simply agree that it's not a bad thing, you know, to build a house because it looks better than something like that, we're going to have a heck of a lot of houses being built across the country. And I do worry about that. But in this particular case, I'd be interested in the answers to my question, although I think I know what it might be.
Thank you, Councillor Costa. Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. The scheme appeal is slightly different to this one. And I think that by comparing them wouldn't be a good idea. By deferring, I wouldn't think that it would be a good idea. I think we need to base this decision upon what's in front of us today.
Thank you, Tracy. We have 3 more speakers: Councillor Reid, Councillor Townsend, Councillor Goodridge. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I must declare that I have previously lived in Elsted, actually on the green. So I know it very well, and I agree that I support what the officer has recommended, because it would, you can see by the diagram we've got in the block plan, it would considerably alter the openness of the views and the openness of the green from the green. And I don't agree that buildings in the AONB and ALGV should be demolished and new houses built. I know there are exceptions, and we have granted, since I've been on this committee, some of those with really exceptional reasons. So I won't be voting against the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Townsend.
Apologies, Chair. I was going to speak to the motion to defer and to say that I didn't support it because it has to be decided on its own merits. But, well, okay. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. So we have Councillor Goodridge, then Councillor Wilson. Thank you.
Chairman, I think there is a distinction between giving permission to convert a dwelling, and I have my doubts as to whether it's 1 metre or 2 metres high, actually, looking at the scale broadly, but be that as it may. There's one thing they must have thought when they applied for planning to convert it to residential, that they had enough height to be able to do so. Otherwise, why would they have applied? But I think there is a distinction between getting permission to convert a building for the residential and knocking it down and rebuilding something else. In my patch, we gave permission, because we hadn't got any good planning reasons to refuse, to convert a pigsty into residential. So, you know, that's fine. But I think if it had been an application to knock down the pigsty and build something new, we'd have taken a different view.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very quick. My question was really that the plan that was allowed to convert must have been livable in. So I see no problem with that, because it is a different set of rules to convert. And I commend the planning officer for putting exactly what I thought on paper. It isn't right. Let them convert it. Don't let them spoil the view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, councillors. So we have a recommendation that this application be refused. Would all those in favour of that recommendation please show now?
Yeah, the application is refused. Motion carried.
One abstention. Yes, so if we take a very short break, because we have a member in the public gallery, so we'll just have a 5-minute break. Yep, 5 minutes, 7:25, we will start. back to work, everyone. So our next application in front of us tonight is Woodside Park, Cathedral Lane, and the officer is Philippa. Philippa, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening again, members. Members will remember this item from Easton in September when it was deferred at the request of Councillor Follows and seconded by Councillor Cossa. I will run through the whole scheme again just to make sure what we're considering tonight, and I will try and be brief. Right, so the application is for the erection of a block of 12 flats together with associated parking and bin store. The 12 flats would be 100% affordable, which would be secured via legal agreement in the event of an approval. The tenure would be rented at no more than 70% of market rent. So turning to the location plan, the application site is located to the south side of Cathedral Lane and forms part of the wider Woodside Park development. The wider site is currently under development for 97 residential units, as well as the retention of the ambulance station. This portion of the site formerly contained an office building known as Bargate House, which was demolished as part of the extant outline and reserved matters permissions. The site is currently free of development pending the determination of this application. To the north of the site is a modern office development known as Sanford Mews that was converted to residential accommodation, and the rear garden of Rosedale, which is a private house. To the northwest is the ambulance station. To the south and east are areas of open countryside that form part of the Greenbelt, AONB and AGLV, known as the Godalming hillsides. The surrounding area consists of a mix of residential and commercial developments. The site is accessed via an existing access from Cathedral Lane. And here we have the aerial photograph. The blue dot shows where the building would be. Returning to the site photographs, first one on this side is taken from the northeast and shows the existing access from Cathedral Lane. This one is taken from the northwest looking towards the proposed site, which would be about there. Photograph 3 is taken from the north and northeast, showing the wider development. No, it isn't. That's basically showing the proposed sites, as is that one. I've skipped ahead of myself here. There we go. These photographs are of the wider site, obviously showing that it's under construction. These are taken from the south and southwest, showing the neighbouring residential units at Sanford Mews and the existing and proposed parking area. Photograph 5 is taken from the northeast, looking towards the existing ambulance station and the wider development. These ones are taken from the west, looking towards Sanford Mews. These are taken from the west, again looking towards Sanford Mews. So these are, no, that one isn't. This is a historic photograph, which is showing, so this is from Google Images because it still exists, showing the now demolished Bargate House, but it's useful to demonstrating this elevation of Sanford Mews. And again, this is another historic photograph showing the now demolished Bargate House and the proposed location of this building. So the planning history is a material consideration. The site is subject to policy SS8 of the local plan part 1, which allocates the wider site suitable for around 100 dwellings, employment and community uses, subject to satisfactory regulation of any potential contamination and achievement of satisfactory access arrangements. Planning permission has been previously granted as part of the wider Woodside Park redevelopment for the erection of a part 2-storey, part 3-storey building to provide a community use at ground floor and commercial office use on the first and second floors. This forms part of the wider approval of outline and reserved matters. The differences between the current proposal and that application are that in terms of the use of the proposed building, the current proposal seeks to provide residential accommodation in the form of 12 flats and associated parking and refuse. The flats are proposed to be 100% affordable. On this slide, we can see the location of the approved building as well as the existing ambulance station, which will be retained. We can also see the wider development. So turning to what is approved, so these are the approved elevations of the community and office building. and this is the floor plan. So turning to the proposed block plan, the building would be 3 stories in height with the 2nd story stepped in from the front elevation. Parking would be located along here and 2 spaces on this side, and bin storage would be here. The proposed elevation, so the northern front elevation shows the entrance to the building here, and this is the 2-story element with the 3rd, sort of the 2nd story stepped in there. This is the rear elevation showing proposed balconies, eastern elevation, and the western elevation. Turning to the floor plan, the ground floor would feature 4 flats as well as the entrance and communal space leading to the flats. First floor would feature another 4 flats, noting balconies for apartments 5, 7, and 8. And the 2nd floor, another 4 flats will be on the 2nd floor with balconies for flats 11 and 12. You will note that the 2nd floor is set in from the northern build line. So I've provided a comparison here of the extant permission and that proposed. So you'll see that they're very, very similar buildings, but just with the addition of the balconies. And these are the other elevations. So turning to the main matters of consideration. So in terms of the planning history, it's a material consideration that permission exists for the erection of a 3-story community and commercial building. Those would be classes B1 and D1 of the old use class order, and I'll come on to that in a moment. This permission is extant through the implementation of the wider permission and could be erected at any time. With regard to policy SS8 of the local plan part 1, this sets out that the site of Woodside Park is allocated for around 100 homes and community and employment uses. The current proposal would see the approved building constructed to form 12 residential units as opposed to the community and commercial building. An element of conflict has been identified with policy SS8, but it has been weighed into the balance. In terms of the loss of approved but not yet constructed commercial and community uses, so as I said, this building has not been constructed. This area of the site is currently used for construction parking for the wider development. With regard to the commercial uses, the applicant commissioned a report by chartered surveyors on the commercial property market in Godalming and the surrounding areas. The report found there to be a plethora of available office space in Godalming and a weak level of demand in this locality. Since the last meeting, the applicant has submitted more information in this regard, which I've set out in some detail in my report. With regard to the community use, the intended occupier at the time of the original application, a nursery, has relocated to permanent premises on Mead Row. The applicant has considered a number of alternatives, such as a doctor's surgery, a museum, a library, a fitness centre, but these uses were considered to not be viable options. I would just note the email that I sent to you all on the 22nd, so that was yesterday, which clarified a couple of points. I won't read the whole email out to you, but just to clarify a couple of points. So the first one is that there's nothing in the original outline or reserve matters permissions in the conditions or the legal agreement that requires the approved building to be used specifically as a nursery. The permission is for class D1 use at ground floor and B1 use above. Both classes B1 and D1 are now incorporated into class E. And I set out in my email what class E covers, and I won't read it all out, but just to briefly touch on them. The class E can cover retail, sale of food and drink, financial services, professional services, indoor sport and recreation, medical or health services, a nursery, and other things such as industrial processes, research and development, or offices that would not have a detriment to the residential amenity. And the second point is that there's nothing in the original outline or reserve matters permissions, conditions, or the legal agreement that requires the approved building to be built at all. It's highly unusual for planning permission to require completion of a particular element. The condition in this regard was not imposed as it's considered that development would not be harmful without this requirement. It's noted that there is a real benefit of the proposal in the provision of 12 affordable residential units in a highly sustainable and suitable location, which would contribute positively to the council's housing need. In terms of the mix and affordable housing, as noted, the proposal would be 100% affordable, which would be secured via legal agreement. 30% would be secured in line with policy AHN1 of the local plan, and the remaining 70% would be secured as additional affordable housing in the legal agreement. The applicant is committed to delivering the affordable housing at a maximum of 70% of the local market rent. The council's housing enabling manager is satisfied that this approach is acceptable, noting the 100% affordable housing proposed, which is a real benefit of the scheme. In terms of the design, as demonstrated on the previous slides, the design is very similar to the extant permission. The alterations include the addition of a number of balconies, which are considered to add interest and articulation. In terms of standard of accommodation, as noted in my report, all bedrooms would meet and exceed the government's technical standards. In terms of the gross internal floor areas, 3 units fall very slightly short, but it's noted that these units either have direct access to the communal areas or would have a balcony. No private amenity spaces proposed, but there would be small areas of communal space as well as access to the publicly accessible wooded area to the south. In terms of residential amenity, it's a material consideration that a commercial and community building could be erected in the same location and would feature windows on each elevation, which would afford views to neighbouring properties. It's acknowledged that the views from a commercial building may be different to those from a residential property in terms of timings. However, it's important to have regard to what could be built under the extant permission. In terms of highways and parking, the proposal would provide 17 off-street parking spaces, which would be 1 short of the council's guidance. However, as set out in some detail in my report, there are 47 other unallocated spaces within the Woodside Park development, and the site is in a highly sustainable location. The County Highway Authority have raised no concern. The applicant has noted their intention to provide 14 cycle spaces in the form of Sheffield stands. The County Highway Authority is of the view that this form of storage is not suitable for long stay residential parking. As such, a condition is attached requiring the submission of details should permission be granted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And now we have 2 speakers. May I ask Mr. Trendle to come forward and speak? And you have 4 minutes, Mr. Trendle.
Chair, members, good evening. I would like to introduce myself as not only the applicant, but also the owner of the oldest nursery in Godalming, opened in 1991. I've owned Rocking Horse Nursery since 2013 and am involved in its day-to-day running, as well as having 2 grandchildren currently there. Therefore, I have expert knowledge and understanding of this area. When the consent for the wider Woodside Park development was granted in 2017, it included a commercial building which was intended to accommodate our nursery. There is a perception that this proposal will result in a loss of a nursery, but that is not the case. The building is not yet built, and we have found permanent residents elsewhere in Waverley. However, I understand there is a concern about the availability of local nursery places, and we have conducted lengthy investigations to allay these fears. You're probably aware that Ofsted set the staffing ratios for nurseries. For example, baby rooms, that is under 2s, require 1 staff member for every 3 children. However, there is at present a major shortage of qualified nursery staff. This is largely due to the low wages of the staff, who can generally earn more money stacking shelves at the supermarket without needing to train for 2 years. I could speak at length about why nurseries cannot pay more, but I have only 4 minutes. The Ofsted staffing requirements combined with the staff shortages is restricting the occupancy of the nurseries. In some cases, this causes room closures, typically baby rooms due to the higher staffing ratios, or even entire nurseries. I imagine that many of us have heard from a neighbour or colleague who cannot find a nursery to send their child, with the reason for this attributed to a shortage of nursery places. But the capacity of local nurseries is not the problem. The issue is down to the lack of staff. Earlier in the year, we were contacted by parents due to the closing of rooms by Bell House Nursery. And only last week, Busy Bees in Binscombe announced that they are temporarily closing their doors and merging with their Godalming setting, both because of staff shortages. To demonstrate further, I've just carried out a search of job vacancies in the area. There are over 60 adverts for nursery staff made by 11 of the 13 local nurseries identified in our earlier report. We have sent you all a copy of this report on government statistics to prove there is a surplus of spaces available. I can only hope you accept the reason for this problem is not local capacity, but a nationwide staffing crisis. This is not something that can be solved by the introduction of a new nursery, although in fact there is a new nursery of 119 spaces opening in Catchall Lane in the new year, just metres from Woodside Park. I repeat, there is no shortage of spaces. However, you must understand we are not losing a nursery here. If we move back to Woodside Park, our Way Court setting will close. There would be no gain in places or capacity. Even if the commercial building were built, there is no obligation to provide nursery use. We have also demonstrated a surplus of office space. Over the last 6 months alone, vacant office space has increased by 25%. As such, and because there is no longer any need for the building, if this application is refused, it will simply not be built. This will deny 12 apartments to be provided to your own council for rent at the council's own charge rate, so truly affordable. We urge you, please, to grant us permission.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trundle. And now I call upon Councillor Crooks to speak for Godalming Town Council.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in opposition to this proposal on behalf of Godalming Town Council. As you have heard, there is some history to the development proposals for this site since the original application was granted back in 2017, when permission was given for residential development, but also amenity play space and community spaces on the ground floor to include a nursery and a community hall. Since then, over a period of time, the proposal has been whittled down, so it is now purely a homogeneous development being proposed of residential properties. Godalming Town Council feels that this homogeneity in provision of types of accommodation is something we should try to avoid, and we should try and maintain variety for the strength of our community. Looking specifically at the nursery provision, currently there is, as we have heard, some uncertainty around the facts and the figures relating to the provisions. One of our councillors on Godalming Town Council has done a survey recently of available spaces and established that actually the Ofsted report of 762 spaces was not evidenced, and that in fact it was found there was only 678 spaces available. So we do contend that there is a shortfall in assessment. There are a couple of other things that we are concerned about from the Town Council point of view. One is concern about what full-time space actually means in terms of the length of provision, start time, end time, therefore leading to a variability perhaps in the peak need for capacity at various times of the day. We're also concerned about the closure of Busy Bees, as previously mentioned, pushing some 76 spaces onto other provisions in the locality. And we recently have had a reduction from Rocking Horse Nursery, reduction of some 100 spaces. Now, developers believe that there is sufficient full-time provision, but Godalming Town Council contends this is not properly evidenced. We wish to know what basis the full-time has been calculated. We wish to know what length are the waiting lists as an actual factual evidence of unmet demand. So we would ask that this information is provided by council and developers, council officers and developers. There are other new developments taking place, and they in turn will lead to more demand on nursery places. So I would ask that consideration of approval for this application is delayed until this more evidence and data is provided by developers and officers as to the current provision shortfalls and the future demands for usable capacity nursery places. Thank you.
4 minutes exactly. Thank you, Councillor Crooks. And now, members, it's open to your opinions and views. And first of all, we have Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have the pleasure of being the ward councillor for this particular part of Godalming, and it's an area that I used to live near and know quite well. There are two elements really about this that we're looking at tonight. One is the question of whether we're content to allow the mixed use status that was agreed upon in the original application to lapse in favour of something else. And then, of course, is the something else of a reasonable standard quality and type to be a reasonable thing for us to agree? Before I go into anything else, could I just ask for a couple of clarification points from officers? There was a number of occasions where the word social housing were used by individuals in the room, and I just want to double check and confirm that these in fact are affordable private housing. They are not social housing belonging to a housing association or by Waverley Borough Council. Can I just confirm that before I continue?
Sorry, Councillor Follows, lots of paper here.
So I saw no references.
Yeah, so it would be affordable rents at maximum of 70% of market rents.
But that's a private landlord / private owners, though. That is not a social landlord or the borough council as a social landlord, just to be clear. Where does it, sorry. And with respect, if they are being owned by Waverley, then why are they at 70% market rate and not Waverley's affordable renting policy? But so that's the secondary question, but we'll get to the first one first.
So I know that the rents would be agreed in the legal agreement as maximum of 70%. So it might be less, but it's maximum of 70. And there may well be commercially sensitive arrangements going forward as to who develops, owns, runs the flats, but that isn't really for us to consider now.
actually, I think that is for us to consider now, because the argument being put forward by officers here is that there is social benefit into us agreeing affordable rent. Now, if we can't establish that that's affordable, and what type of affordable, and I often use that word with a slight snigger in the background because what affordable really means, if we aren't able to ascertain here right now what brand of affordable this is, and I would say here, if the information is commercially sensitive, then I will be immediately motioning to go into exempt to discuss it, because I don't want to determine this application without knowing that information. And if it was commercially sensitive, it could have been included in pink papers anyway. You're arguing a benefit here from the housing, which we can't establish without knowing who the owner of the housing is. I'll carry on for a minute because there's two other bits a bit related to a similar point. The report mentions social housing relief from SIL. So there is also the contention that any benefit from any affordable housing is offset itself by a reduction in SIL. I do note the words you've used in the report, social housing relief from SIL, which my understanding would be there is then no SIL. So that does offset the benefit provided by affordable housing straight away, because it's not a gift to the community. It is in exchange for not providing infrastructure, which, bearing in mind you're building more houses, is sometimes a difficult thing for residents to get across. So again, it goes back to what type of housing is this? Who is going to be running it? And is it getting some relief from SIL? And if so, what kind to what level? And I don't really think I can go any further without knowing those things. Apologies to the rest of the committee for making you wait.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. We're just having a chat here amongst officers. Thank you.
Madam Chair, shall I go on my other points while officers are trying to find those particular points? I'm minded of a non-determination point if I were to motion for a deferral to seek extension on this particular topic, and I wouldn't want to be suggesting a refusal without exploration of some of the other matters.
May I just check that if you carry on, Philippa, can you listen to, yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you. I was about to ask the same question. Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so going on to some of the other points. So we've got two, as I mentioned, we've got two elements. We've got the context of why we wanted a mixed use development in the first place, and then on to the actual buildings themselves. I'll start with what I think are the easier bit about the buildings themselves. I mean, a lot of that development is fairly uninspiring. It is just about above the space standards most of the time. It is within the town centre area. So in terms of principle of development, I don't believe there's many particular objections I can levy that would stick, frankly, for what's being proposed. However, going back to the main reason I motioned for a deferral in the first place, what bothers me often is that in the context of local plan and neighbourhood plan, we set policies in order to protect commercial space. And then what happens is when we have an individual application that's been required as part of its process to restore that or to have new provision of that sort of space, we then take a snapshot of the economy at that particular point in time, or the market at that point in time, apply it, and then strike it out in perpetuity from that development, permanently depriving the town of any ability to get it back, which always does bother me. Now, thank you to Councillor Crooks and also to Councillor Waitman in the audience for going through a decent chunk of the the nursery side investigation, which I think has quite clearly demonstrated from the evidence of what capacity there is, that there is actually currently an under provision. And certainly I'd expand that to say it is not just about the numbers. And as the applicant very definitely correctly, in my opinion, pointed out, actually a lot of the issues with nurseries are actually about the provision of staff and ability to pay them and retain them. And so I want to actually decouple that issue slightly. But before I do, just to conclude, a lot of it is also about the distribution of nursery provision and the type of nursery provision throughout the town. And at the moment, because of that staffing issue and capacity issue, they are starting to aggregate in certain parts of the town, making them less accessible to some residents. So that is a lot of where my concern comes from. But as has been pointed out by officers and others, this is actually a Class E in general. So actually we don't need to be looking at nurseries per se. It is one type of use. And as a result, we're looking here saying that the applicant has gone out and done some level of market testing to show there's not going to be any demand for it. Well, I'll just say as a starter for 10, it's a good community asset in the heart of the town. Has anybody asked Godalming Town Council if they want it? I don't believe they have. And as I'm also leader of Godalming Town Council, I'd probably know. So that's just one area that won't have been considered just as a starter for 10. And quite a lot of these people won't be even looking at a building that doesn't exist, that they don't know what it looks like, or what it will cost, or what services it will have, or any of these other things. So to say there's no market demand because some pretty rickety old offices in another part of Godalming haven't got the demand is a little spurious. There is also, if we take the other side of the coin, the proposal here is for 12 flats. Well, there's quite a lot of flats that haven't been built out or occupied in other parts of Godalming just down the road from it. So there's equally not evidence of the demand for flats, if we want to take the other side of that particular coin, to back up that. So from my point of view, if we are not determining that these are social property, and that's where we're establishing the benefit of these, if these aren't social property, I accept the definition of affordable as 70% market rate, but I reiterate my usual objection that is a nonsense in the vast majority of Waverley anyway, which is why we set a local policy at Waverley of lower than that. These aren't social properties, they're market properties as far as I can see, unless somebody can tell me otherwise. They're going to be still exempt, so a lot of that benefit is immediately offset by that. And as such, I don't believe it establishes a reasonable need for that change to residential from the original plan. So I believe it's retained policy IT2 and neighbourhood plan policy GOD2 regarding this sort of mixed use development and why we want it. And it still applies. And I've seen no evidence to persuade me so far of any other reason. If we don't get an answer regarding the affordable and social housing question, I'm going to be putting a refusal down on the grounds of that. And at the moment, my view would be to refuse based on the grounds that we still are seeking mixed use development in Godalming. There are very good evidence to suggest why that should be, as backed up by the local plan and also the neighbourhood plan, saying that the residents of Godalming and the town want it and need it. And those are articulated very well by officers. So I'll go back to my original question, Madam Chair.
Thank you indeed. Councillor Follows. Are we ready?
Chairman, yes. We've reviewed all of the Section 106 agreements we've entered into over the last number of years. We would expect that the 106 would engage with the developer, if the committee resolved to grant permission tonight, would engage with the developer for the involvement of a registered provider to enter into a nomination agreement for nominated tenants. That's from our list. So we would expect that, that any arrangement would not deal with individual landlords, but would deal with a registered provider. And that is the normal arrangement.
Through you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, a
registered
provider.
social housing provider.
Yes.
Then can I ask why the limit? Why it is 70% market rent and not less? That is not the standard social rent that we try to seek at Waverley. That is the market affordable rent when that comes up. Social rent at Waverley is supposed, as per the affordable housing policy that this council set and planning are fully aware of, is supposed to seek better than that.
Thank you. So page starts on 66 of the officer report, goes on to 67. the housing enabling team have reviewed this in some detail, and these words are taken from them, and they have said that it will either be 55% of local market rent or the no more than 70% of market rent. So the reason why I was saying it's no more than 70 is because it would be no more than 70, but it might be that they agree the 55% of local market rent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Apologies, sorry, Madam Chair, if I may just make one very final comment, with your indulgence. The benefit can only be articulated on facts rather than maybes, I think is my final point.
Thank you. I would sort of reiterate what I said in my report, in that there is nothing in the previous permissions, conditions or legal agreements that requires the previous building to be built. And as you said yourself, Councillor Follows, this classes B1 and D1 are now under Class E, so there is nothing requiring a nursery to be built in this location. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippa. We have Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Townsend. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. When I looked at it, I thought initially that it would be worthwhile, because nothing will be built unless we make a decision of some kind. And to me, affordable housing is an enigma, really. It is social housing that we want. Can we actually put a Section 106 agreement condition on this, that it would be run by a registered housing provider, or indeed Waverley itself?
Philippa, is that something you'd like to respond to? Oh, Barry.
I think it would be impractical to require a developer to go out into the market and identify a registered provider who would be prepared to engage on specific terms. I can't see that would pass the test of reasonableness in terms of analogy by reference to planning conditions, given the fact we just don't know from our housing enabling colleagues what level of negotiation has been undertaken with anyone, and therefore that's my rather limited advice to you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Councillor Townsend. Oh, I beg your pardon?
No, I hadn't finished, sorry. Yes, I can understand that. There must be a way around this impasse, because I think that we have to be very careful of how we go. Could we put a condition in there that the affordable rents would be amenable to our housing team and the mixture? Is that possible? I think.
Thank you, Chair. No, Barry. So I think we're talking about elements of it that are not really for the room, as they would be part of the legal arrangements that would take place between the developer and the provider. But I would say that, so the 30% is policy compliant, and they're providing 70% on top of that, which is secured as additional affordable housing in the Section 106 agreement. But I think the terms of the Section 106 agreement are not really for us to be discussing in this level of detail here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippa. So Councillor Townsend now, and then Councillor Cossa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So this is, for all intents and purposes, this is a private landlord, okay? I don't see how they can get civil exemption at this moment in time at all. So I'm very confused about that. They're not a registered provider. We haven't got a registered provider involved as we stand in this room at the present time. So we can't even be sure that we're going to secure the affordable rent on these properties, or whether we can do that in perpetuity at all. And we also don't know, you know, with a registered provider, they have certain other standards, they are inspected, they are, you know, there's a whole gambit of legislation that comes along with a registered provider, which I cannot see here. So I'm very, very concerned, and I cannot really agree this at this moment in time, because there is too much that I don't know, really. However, coming back to the actual property itself, because I have got some questions about the actual, I mean, I know that somewhere it said the design is not exciting. That is the understatement of the century, okay? It was built as an office. It looks like an office. It still looks like an office with balconies stuck on it. I am so disappointed with the design. The car parking is like office car parking. You know, God forbid you've got the end space and have to carry your shopping all the way down from the end every single time. You know, it is not an attractive site. And whilst I appreciate that there are, you know, it's the shape and orientation of the site, it is really disappointing that something hasn't been done to make it feel more homely, you know, to make it feel like somebody would want to live there. I've got no idea about any of the energy efficiency measures. There's the massive big roof. Where's the opportunity for solar panels? Where's the SPD? You know, our sustainability and climate change SPD. You know, come on, we really, really want to make sure that we are delivering. If these were affordable houses, we want people not to be in poverty, in fuel poverty. We'd want to make sure that there were energy efficiency measures on it. There doesn't appear to be any landscaping between Sanford Mews and the parking spaces. Again, you know, those poor people looking out on just cars. Surely we could have chucked a few bushes or trees in there, you know, really to try and make it look a bit better. This is not in the same ownership as the main estate. The main estate, I don't think, has adoptable roads within it. I remember going through that planning application. So therefore, there is no guarantee that they can use the LEAP, the local equipped area of play. They may be, like we've got in Cranley, as I've mentioned, ad infinitum, you know, the position that these people will not be able to use that. If there are children here, they will not be able to use the local equipped area of play. There is hardly any outdoor space here. I mean, what kind of a life are we creating for these people here? They have to wander down to their house past a whole load of cars and walk into an office block for all intents and purposes. You know, we cannot say, we say there's not enough space there for people, but they can use the LEAP. Whilst we can't guarantee that outdoor space, there's more pressure on the ancient woodland around there as well. And, you know, really, I would have liked to have seen somebody come forward if they wanted to, you know, not build the original building, to really build somewhere where people would like to live and not somewhere where people have to live. So I really, at this moment in time, can't bring myself to agree this application on so many different levels, but also on the fact that I cannot, hand on heart, really think that we can guarantee that it is affordable, and I cannot see how it can be civil exempt. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cossa.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. First of all, if I can just make a sort of fairly preliminary point about interest here. I mean, just in case any councillors wonder why Councillor Follows and I, who are both members of the same committee at Godalming Town Council, have objected to this proposal, and that he should declare an interest, and I shouldn't. I just want to explain that although I sit on that committee, I have made a general declaration that I do not take part in any discussions about applications that I would subsequently deal with as a member of the planning committee. So I have no interest to declare in that sense. The second thing I wanted to do is I just wanted to say thank you to Philippa, who has engaged extensively in correspondence and helped clarify in my mind a whole number of the planning issues relating to all of this. I have to say I've done a bit of my own research around the nursery thing. I absolutely get, you know, the general class and so on, but it's terribly difficult if you're a councillor and you're being provided with information that suggests that, you know, there's a surfeit of provision and everyone is telling you that they're struggling to get the children into nurseries and so on. And there's certainly an issue that Councillor Hegan raised about the nature of that provision. And I have talked both to users and providers and reached some of my own conclusions about this. And I'm bound to say generally, they do coincide with that of our speaker earlier this evening, that most of the issues seem actually to be related to staffing in particular and other operational issues rather than capacity in terms of building. So that is a point that I have to accept. But I have two other problems with this application, both of which to some extent have already been articulated, but I'll just state them simply. The first one is that, as Councillor Follows said, there's a lot of work been done within the Town Council and elsewhere, and we've tried to enshrine it in our local plans and so on, to try and ensure that in areas like this, we don't just get unremitting residential development, and we do build in some community use. So given that we're now actually being told, well, forget the bit about nursery, it could be a lot of other things, I sort of take the point that Councillor Follows has made, that it would be really quite nice to have a community facility there. Having said that, the conflict for me is the fact that it's also been made pretty clear, both by our planning officers and also by the owner and developer here, that there is going to be no intention to build that community facility. So I then have to look at the proposal in front of us for housing and say, well, perhaps I have to put all of that to the back of my mind and see if we have a benefit here. And I have to say, the thing that sort of made my mind up was when I looked at those proposals up there and Philippa flashed them up and said, well, look, this was the office block and this is going to be the residential development. And they looked absolutely identical. And I share a huge number of the concerns that Councillor Townsend has expressed. If we had none of this background about whether, you know, it should be and was going to be a community use, and this were just coming forward to us as a proposal for 12 housing units, I would find it not acceptable for my community, and I can't vote for it at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Cossett. Councillor Denis.
I did put my hand up this time, so thank you. I mean, I agree, it's not particularly inspiring, but the point I was going to raise, and a lot of it's now been covered by the time it's got to me, was I'm getting concerned that we're going down a certain road here. That's not really as our role as a planning committee. You know, I really am getting concerned that we're sort of getting off track to what we should be doing. We've got some reasons that we're concerned about, i.e. the design and everything else, and we've possibly got questions that we haven't got answered. But if we're not careful, we're going to make a rod for our own back on this. You know, we either personally go for a deferment, get that information, go for a short deferment, because I'm really not sure some of the information, but have a really, really quick turnaround, a couple of weeks. So it's fair on the applicant, because I think it's unfair on the applicant that we can't decide what we've got and what we haven't got as a planning committee. And I don't think that's fair on the applicant. There's also about being fair to the community. So I would favour just getting that information on a quick turnaround. So any issue about non-determination, by the time they've got the paperwork in, we've considered the information, because otherwise I think we're making a rod for our own back, and it's going to cost us a lot of money and go back to where we were if we're not careful.
Thank you, Councillor Denis. Barry, this has already been deferred. Yes. So I don't know if you can defer again. Yeah. May I let you chat that and Councillor Follow?
We would use that standard. If something unusual is noticed, we could bring it back to committee on.
Thank you. Councillor Follows, Councillor.
Right. So the balance of this is whether effectively policy SS8 has been, you've basically articulated a benefit. So going back to, I think, the design, the fact that those are a large office block effectively of flats, they're just about big enough, so they're technically in the space standards. There's nothing in terms of our environmental and sustainability SPD put in here about making these an environmentally sustainable structure, which I think we should be seeking for all homes, but particularly social and affordable housing should definitely have that. As well as access to the outdoor spaces and various other issues that I think have been articulated. My gut instinct here would not to be defer, it would be to motion to refuse, because not only has the benefit not been articulated in terms of the balance in SS8, we've not addressed the issues in terms of retained policy IC2 and GOD2 about commercial and retail spaces and other types of use like Class E in Godalming, and also what has actually been proposed to be built is not suitable for what we're talking about here. It has not been demonstrated that it's affordable or social housing at this particular point of the committee. With that bit we could at least overcome, but the design of it is still not exactly something that we should be striving for in Waverley, frankly, for any type of housing, and especially not for affordable and social housing. So I would actually at this point be motioning to refuse. I feel like the room might have a seconder for that. I would encourage, as I imagine there would the gut reaction from the applicant would be to appeal, I would encourage the applicant to come and have a discussion with Waverley's Housing, me as the ward councillor, and actually have a discussion about a genuinely good mixed use scheme for this bit that complies with the spirit of what the planning application was talking about, meaningfully engages with the town council potentially about use of that mixed use, and delivers some social and affordable housing that would actually also be sustainable and reasonable and well designed. I don't think there's any objection to seeing something on the land. It's just what that is, frankly. And at the moment, I don't think this is good enough. And I have to say, in terms of evidence for justifying commercial nursery use, if the owner is also related to the nursery, who has then supplied the evidence that there isn't need for nursery provision, I can't see how that possibly isn't a conflict of interest in terms of the evidence submission. That's not an independent assessment of the nursery. I'm sorry, it's not. So I'm putting a refusal motion up, Madam Chair, for this particular item.
Thank you very much. Philippa.
I don't know if it's helpful for me to come back at this stage, but to say that so our housing enabling team, who are officers experts in this area, and this is set out in my report, have said that, and I'll just read this paragraph so that I don't say it wrong. The applicant has committed to deliver the affordable homes either at social rent or at a reduced affordable rent, capped at 70% of the local market rent, including service charges. Either approach would be in line with the Affordable Homes Delivery Strategy 2022-25. Although social rent is the housing enabling team's preference, we appreciate that this may be more difficult to achieve on a site that is 100% affordable housing, and the Section 106 agreement will require the provision of either social rent or affordable rent, capped at 70% of market rent, which is in line with the council strategy. And with regard to sustainability, this application was deferred, as we have already discussed, and when it was considered last time, it was before the SPD came in, and there was nothing for officers to require the applicant to address in that regard. But we could obviously attach a condition requiring a scheme of sustainability measures to come forward as part of any approval to address that point. Thank you.
So did the Sill question get answered, by the way, at any point during this debate?
Can I just come back on that? First of all, you know, I need to know about the local equipped area of play and that, and the amenity space for the people, you know, as well, because that hasn't been answered. But I still can't see how this can be Sill exempt at all. I cannot see how that can be the case. And I wouldn't want to imply, you know, that we are approving that at all.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. So as far as I'm aware, the LEAP is not restricted to the occupiers of wider Woodside Park. I don't know how that would be possible to do so.
The roads are not adopted. If the roads are not adopted, which they can't be there because there was all those parking courts, there was no pavements, it was all, I mean, they weren't built to an adoptable standard, they can't have been. And therefore, the LEAP is within the red line boundary. We know this for a fact, that the people can prevent other people from accessing the LEAP unless it was written into the original Section 106 agreement that that was not the case. And I can't think that we did that. So we cannot rely on amenity space that is not within the control of this site. We just can't. In which case, this is a cramped site, it's overdevelopment of the site, it hasn't got enough amenity space, the design is poor, there is no energy efficiency measures, and the parking is, you know, is the design of the parking is not built to be secure by design.
Thank you. Barry, are you going to say anything on Sill, or are you happy for me to just mention something?
In principle, we know from the Loxford Road inquiry and advice from Robin Greed of Council that the loss of Sill revenue can be a material planning consideration going to refusal. But I think that would depend on the quantum involved. And I'm not sure how much Sill is, I don't know how much Sill is being potentially lost here.
So I guess Sill is not a material planning consideration for the merits of the scheme.
We'd have to receive a claim for social housing relief from the developer, and to do that, they have to assume liability in the first place. So I think we'd have to consider that claim if it were to come in. And of course, there's mention of Homes England funding as well. So that would have to be, again, taken into the considerations as to whether that constitutes warrants social housing relief to be exempt from Sill. So probably can't say one way or the other as we sit here tonight, sorry.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, as it stands, we cannot take, you know, that doesn't appear to be Sill exempt at all.
Thank you all. We have a proposal to refuse, and is there a seconder? There is.
Yes, Chair, for all the reasons that Councillor Follows and Townsend have both articulated so well, we've been asked to approve something that we really don't know whether it's a pig or a poke, do we? So I'm quite happy to second the proposal to refuse this application.
So I believe with a seconded proposal, we move to a vote. All those in favour of the proposal to refuse, please show. And those against the refusal, and any abstentions.
So that is a motion to refuse grant carried with a vote of 10 refusals and 2 abstained.
Thank you very much. And so we move now to...
Sorry, Madam Chairman, do you not have to go through the reasons?
I beg your pardon. Thank you very much.
So certainly on the one side, we've got GOD2, retained policy IC2 and policy SS8, because we've met that balance. I imagine councillors Else and Townsend might wish to suggest some design reasons as well.
Yeah, design, cramped, lack of amenity space. Yeah, landscaping, really, if we can use that at all. Yeah, I'm not sure whether we can use the SPD at all on the sustainability. So it mentioned that it was the fact that it was deferred beforehand, but we have got CC1 and CC2 anyway. So there are energy efficiency things within that. I know it's you know, we haven't yet adopted the national space standards, but now that LPP2, some of the policies have got a bit of weight, would that be one that has gathered a bit of weight on the technical space standards, in which case that could be yeah, because that wasn't part of the main modifications. Cramped, I mean, you know, whatever else.
Philippa, let me know when. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm more or less ready with reason 1, and reason 2, I would probably just need with a bit more time to just put the policies together, but perhaps I could set off. So in terms of the first one, I may suggest the proposal would result in the loss of an approved community and commercial asset, resulting in conflict of policies SS8, EE2 and ICS1 of Local Plan Part 1, and retains policy IC2 of Local Plan 2002 and GOD2 from Godalming and Farncombe Neighbourhood Plan. And then in terms of the second one, the proposal, by way of its cramped design and lack of amenity space and landscaping, would conflict with, and at the moment I've got to policy TD1 of the Local Plan Part 1, D1, D4 of Local Plan 2002. Thank you, Beth. GOD5. Okay, and so amenity space and landscaping. And can we review? Just bear with a second. I'm just looking at the wording. We could put CC2 and CC4 in, CC1 and CC2, beg your pardon. Yeah, I would probably be more comfortable putting them in the same reason for refusal than a separate one. Yeah, something along the lines of okay, so just the second one again, the proposal by way of its cramped design, lack of amenity space and landscaping would conflict with TD1, D1, D4, GOD5, GOD16, oh, and C1 and C2. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you very much, everybody is happy with that, and thank you very much, Philippa, and thank you, Mr. Trendle. We come now to the applications not subject to public speaking, and the first is at Churchview Station Road in Godalming. Sam.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. The application under consideration is WA 2022-02084 at Churchview Station Road, Godalming, for the erection of a storage shed. This application is being brought to committee as it is an application under Regulation 3, whereby the applicant is Waverley Borough Council. This is an aerial view. The application site is situated to the east of Station Road in Godalming, within the Godalming Conservation Area, surrounded by a mix of period buildings. Churchview is a recently completed block of 14 affordable flats, homes with a private car park and amenity space located to the rear. So photo A shows block B of Churchview as viewed from Station Road, with the adjacent access to the private car park. The storage shed would be located to the rear of the building. Photo B on the left shows the existing brick wall fence that would shield views of the storage shed. Photo C shows the existing bin sheds. And yeah, they will be located, shows the location of the storage shed with fencing to the south and to the east, and then the bin sheds are there. Proposed elevations show a modest structure, 2.27 meters tall, 3 meters wide. It lies within the conservation area after consultation with the historic buildings officer. Proposal would lead to no harm. Views would be limited, oblique, and only fleetingly glimpsed from Station Road. The impact would be mainly confined to the use of the development itself and would not consider there to be any significant impact on the character or appearance of the wider conservation area. Designs a modest size and form that would appear clearly ancillary, and its use would be to store residents' bikes would be appropriate. Structure would not be an overdevelopment of the communal space, representing a footprint of just 5.4 square meters of approximately 66 square meters of communal space. Regarding residential amenities, storage should be well separated from surrounding dwellings, be a modest form of development. Lastly, whilst located within an area of high archaeological potential, county archaeologists stated no harm, given that the development have sort of no below ground disturbance. So yeah, in conclusion, the main points to consider are the impacts to the conservation area, impact on design and visual amenity, and residential amenity. Officers are recommending approval of this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sam. Oh, I was going to say, thank you very much, Sam, for that very full and fact-based presentation. Are there any speakers? Shall we move to the recommendation?
I just want to ask one thing, honestly, just a short thing. It's for bike storage, and whenever usually we put bike storage, we insist on a bike lock thing inside so that people can, why are we not asking for that? Because we normally always ask for it.
Sam, have you an answer? Yeah.
And locked in.
Yeah.
Well, these are in gardens, we always put them in. We always put one in. I'm just asking, just, you know.
Thank you,
for
Councillor
interest. Thank you.
Councillor Follows, did you have a point? No. So may we move to the recommendation? The recommendation is this is granted. Could all in favour please show?
Application granted.
Thank you very much. And our last application this evening is at 183 Oxford Ridge. Susie, how kind of you to be so patient and to present it to us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. 183 Oxford Ridge, Godalming. This application has been brought before the Planning Committee as Waverley Borough Council is the applicant. And the Council's scheme of delegation is clear that such items must be determined by the Planning Committee. The application site is within the developed area of Godalming, where the principle of development is acceptable subject to residential and visual amenity considerations. The proposal is for the erection of a single-storey front and side extension and alterations, together with the installation of an air source heat pump. So this is the location plan showing the site in red. There you go, is the aerial view. The block plan shows the proposed new area of built form in blue. Site photos show the front and rear elevation, and on the bottom are the neighbouring properties. So neighbouring property 184 has a very similar extension already. So this is the existing and the proposed front elevation, rear elevation, and side elevation. And these are the ground floor plans, proposed and existing. So it's wheelchair friendly. And the first floor, it's just been reconfigured. So the matters for consideration of visual amenity and residential amenity. And officer recommendation is permission be granted subject to conditions and informatives. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Susie. I have 3 speakers already. Councillor Follows, Councillor Cossa and Councillor Wilson. Councillor Cossa follows.
So again, I'm very happy to see this in my ward. It is, you know, an air source heat pump. Let's see what happens. This is great. Let's see what, in terms of impact on residential amenity, well, it should improve residential amenity with all things that come with it. So I think it's great that we're seeing this come through. So well done to the applicant, Waverley Borough Council, for putting it up. And thank you to the housing portfolio holder who's sitting in the audience and his team for getting it through. So very, very much support.
Marvellous. Councillor Cossa. Okay, Councillor Wilson, how kind.
I'm just going to put out a warning. I read very recently that if we have a power cut and you have a heat pump, it takes anything up to a day to safely start it off again. So in
Depends on
yeah, but I would hope that our housing team are aware of this in the first case, and in a case like this, that there is something in place to help the occupants and get them to start it safely. But that's aside, I think it's excellent, and good luck to you.
Councillor Cossa, would you like to? Councillor Darcy. Councillor Darcy.
I felt I had to say something. I haven't said anything for the whole meeting. No, I do have something to say. I do have a point. Did I read there's something about there was going to be external insulation applied to the? Yeah, was that right? Yeah. So that should help if the heat pump were to conk out for any reason. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Darcy. Councillor Cossa.
I want to go last because mine's not a substantive point, it's a procedural point. I did just wonder, I worry desperately that sometimes we have officers sitting here for absolutely hours to deal with applications that are always going to go through very quick. And I just wondered if you, Chair, I'm not asking for a response now, could just think with officers about whether we really could think about the order of the agenda so that doesn't have to happen.
I agree.
Well,
that's
speaking first. No, that's just dreadful. All right, yeah, I have my answer, but no, I just think it's so unfair. Or maybe we could do it from home on video if they want or something, but.
Councillor
All right,
Cossa,
thank you.
so we have a recommendation in front of us. Would all those in favour please show?
Thank you. Granted.
We really ought to let them do it on Zoom.